The idea of a real, actual threat, it's not there. Evil E.T. is the manifestation of Hollywood's fictional money-making agenda, which is fine. I was in the business of making money. The film industry makes money. And there is no genre in all of film history that has made more money than movies about extraterrestrials, which tells us evil aliens have dominated. In spite of that, in spite of all of the evil aliens that we have been seeing since we were kids, overall, the idea of evil aliens in terms of the disclosure process underway is minimal.
All this and more coming up on this episode of the Truth Seeker Podcast. Really quick, before we get started, if you are blessed by this ministry, if you're blessed by this platform, anything that I bring to the table, I ask you to partner with me via Patreon. Go to patreon.com/truthseeker and you unlock rewards, my entire discography of music, webinars, meditations, weekly hangouts, and so much more. Patreon.com/truthseeker. Go check it out.
Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? To a place to walk on troubled seas, faith to stand when I don't believe. I just wanna be with you. Won't you come and take me away? I just wanna be with you. Won't you come?
You are now locked into the Truth Seeker Podcast.
Gargoyles, psychics, everything's ungodly. Dark Savage.
Streaming live at truthseeker.com.
She's not a Christian.
Give it up, y'all.
Your portal to the paranormal, esoteric, and all things spiritual.
She's tampering in dark sided stuff.
And now, your host, Truth Seeker.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Truth Seeker Podcast. I'm your host, Truth Seeker, excited for another episode. Today, my guest is researcher, Mr. Stephen Bassett.
You want to get a good start in the post-disclosure world? Praise everybody that helped bring it about, even if they had been hard, fast against it for the last 30 years. But in the end came around, praise them. Plenty of admiration for the people that have stuck with it all these years. Absolutely, don't forget them. But we need to start a new era in human history. And it can't start off too positive. I told you so is a negative. So I'm gonna do my best to stay away from it, but I am human. And maybe in a private conversation, I may mention that to somebody confidentially off the record, sign an NDA. But hey, everybody knows who told who so.
Yeah.
Right? They already know it.
They usually come back to, hey, let's interview that guy that's been talking about it for 30 years, 20 years. It's like, yeah. Or the demanding an apology, or you're not going to get it. They're not going to, hey, I'm sorry that we doubted you. You know, not everybody is talking about, a lot of this stuff that within the exopolitics community and ufology and those things been talking about for a long time, and been doing the work. So I commend you for sticking with it. And thank you for your work and your dedication, your research. Jumping right in, we can jump into news and everything that's going on right now, but can we talk a little bit about how you got started having an interest in ufology and all things UAP?
I've been asked that many times. I was always a sci-fi guy. When I was a kid, I read science fiction. I thought it was fantastic. I was asked to read Shakespeare in school. I didn't understand a damn thing he wrote. It was like, this is supposed to be English. I have no idea what English you're talking about. But nevertheless, maybe because of that, I tended to be better at school in math and science. So I went on to go to college and study to be an engineer, but then switched to physics. And so that was my early life. But not surprisingly, when an article about this phenomena turned up here and there, and it did, I always noted them with interest, naturally. I'm reading these science fiction books by Heinlein about Mars and spaceships and so forth, and then an article turns up about something in our own atmosphere that we can't explain. I thought, oh yeah. So I was always paying attention, and I read enough articles to conclude, even in my late teens, that well, clearly, since I had no bias, right, no reason to negatively react to it, I read those articles and concluded, well, this is non-human technology. It was quite obvious to me. And I looked forward to learning more. I looked forward to the government coming forward and saying, wow, this is what's going on. Here's the details. But the government didn't. And so I went on with my life. So when at the age of 49, I made a decision that it's time to put up or shut up, get busy living or get busy dying, as they said in Shawshank Redemption, I made a decision to engage this issue. By then it had matured. This was 1996, 95. It had matured substantially, way beyond where it was when I was a teenager, reading articles that were making it clear to me it was real and non-human. Now it was far more substantive, far more established, much more evidence had piled up. And I said, I think that's what I'm going to do. And so I made an intellectual decision to engage the issue by volunteering to work for a contact research organization called PEER that was founded by John Mack in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I drove there and spent 4 months. It's that simple. Now, there were things that happened to me in the years just prior to that decision that helped me make it. This is personal stuff. I'll be brief because, again, my overall personal life is just not the stuff of memoirs. But one thing was, of course, I read John Mack's book Abduction, which was a seminal book published in the early 1990s, shortly after he held a symposium at MIT, where he brought in researchers and contactees to speak on that campus. It was not sponsored by MIT, but it was held there. And then he wrote the book Abduction, which was quite extraordinary. This had a very significant effect on me. But something else happened. While I was in San Luis Obispo, which is where I was when I made the decision, I had joined Amnesty International prior to that. I'd been sort of just a member, I guess you could say. You know how it is. You sign up, you're a member. Because I am, I think at core an activist. I've always been, but never really was able to truly engage it in a full capacity. But I had joined Amnesty International. But while I was there, this is one of these unusual things that happens in life, is when Schindler's List came out. So the movie and hit the theaters and had a profound effect. I saw it. Certainly one of the most moving and important movies I've ever seen or ever will see. And I got the idea. It had already made its run, but San Luis Obispo was a small town with it has one downtown theater, single screen, and then I think out in the suburbs it might have had a multiple screen theater. Why not hold a special screening of Schindler's List to raise money for Amnesty International? And I approached the theater, and they said, that's a cool idea. They were arranged to get the film, which wouldn't have cost much because it had already made its initial run. And so the invitations went out and made some ads, and a number of people showed up for a modest amount of money to watch, perhaps in most cases, again, Schindler's List. And it's because I had arranged this, I spoke at the beginning and introduced the movie. This was a very powerful moment for me. It was as if my fundamental nature as an activist was given voice for the real first time. Marching in the odd anti-war movement march or civil rights march when I was younger, yeah, but this was different. I was an older man, middle-aged man, and naturally people were happy to be there, and they were very pleased, and it was a nice thing to do. And it lit that torch. And so it wasn't that much after that, many months later, that when I made a decision, what am I going to do next? I decided to go activist in a sense to engage this issue in some way or fashion, starting as a volunteer. And I did. And the beauty of it was that Mac was in Cambridge. So Mac's group was in Cambridge. And so I was there for 4 months. But much of my life was spent in Washington, D.C. area. I knew it well. Had family there, place to live and so forth. And so it was in Cambridge while sitting in an office in my last days, because I was time for me to go. I was a volunteer. I'd done some volunteering. There was not room for a paid opportunity at that point, and it wasn't a right fit anyway. But it's when I realized something that was profound to me, probably not the first person to think this, but I had a very significant thought that the issue that I had been paying attention to since I was a teenager, that had developed and matured for the next 50-some years, but was still not resolved. The government's position was still, what are you talking about? What is this there that you think is there? That it wasn't about proof and science. It hadn't been about that for a long time. The science and the proof and the research had been done by hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people, just not by the universities and government-aid organizations. So what was the problem? The problem was political. This was a political decision, not a scientific decision. A political decision that the truth of the non-human intelligence with technology in our air, in our space, around our world, was deliberately withheld, embargoed by the government for national security reasons. And until that political decision was changed, we could research this for the rest of our life and our children's life and our grandchildren's lives, and we would not get an outcome. And so I said, I'm going to engage it politically. And so I left, went to Washington, registered as a lobbyist immediately for an organization that I created called Paradigm Research Group. And knowing that I was the first lobbying registration of that type ever, that would attract attention, it did. Get some articles in major papers like Washington Post and sort of launch my nascent career as a, quote, disclosure activist, which is what I've always been. The term didn't come into play for me until later. I was called the UFO lobbyist for years, still am, but that's, just a component of a full political engagement of the issue. There are now a number of lobbyists registered on this issue. And that's how it is. That's how it began. It was a decision to become a political activist finally late in life.
Was you involved with the Disclosure Project early on?
I was tangentially involved. I became aware of Stephen Greer pretty quickly after I registered as a lobbyist, and was certainly impressed by his work. He was doing some pretty amazing things, and daringly so. I mean, he was doing things way ahead of his time. He was, as an admitted contactee, was doing contact work where he's going out and trying to do contact for the fifth kind. And I noted that and followed it. But then, of course, he did a major event in 2001 at the National Press Club after a year or so of filming witnesses and gathering witnesses together. Something similar to what I would do essentially 12 years later. 12 years later, and held a very significant press conference at the National Press Club. And I helped a little bit with that. I was not directly involved in the project. I was not part of the project, but I assisted to what I could. And I was present for that. And of course, it had a very profound effect on me. And it showed great promise. There was a potential for serious mainstream news engagement as a result of that press conference. But all of that essentially evaporated when in just 4 months, there was an attack on the country that launched us into a whole new era of sorts and led fairly quickly to the Iraq War. So as history tends to do, the great plans of men are somewhat interrupted. And so we moved on from there. Greer is obviously still doing a great deal of work and books, documentaries, the works. And I've traveled my own path in my own way to engage the politics of this.
Speaking of what he's doing, just I guess helping to coin the phrase, I don't know if he did or not, but the CE5 initiative, where people are starting to essentially have their own contact experiences where they're not being abducted, walking down a strange alley or something. They're actually going out into fields or before they go to sleep, different protocols to try to contact ETs and those things. And some of them seem to have profound experiences. What is your thoughts on that whole phenomena of people wanting to get the answers, and the answers that they're finding are stargazing while meditating and those kind of things? What's your thoughts on that whole protocol?
The fact that people are trying to engage extraterrestrials is totally logical. As I said, the proof that non-human intelligence was engaging us was established long ago. In terms of the people working for the United States government and the Army Air Force in 1947, it was established beyond a reasonable doubt, because Roswell was exactly as the key researchers had described it. It was a crashed vehicle of non-human origin with non-humans in it, right? And the government got the crashed vehicle and got the bodies and the then living entity. And that's about as much proof as you could possibly have. So aside from everything else that's happened since, real, not real, made, fake, disinformation, propaganda, whatever, based on that event alone, the United States government has known full well what is here. And the government will have to account for that at some time. But in any event, it wasn't long before, just like myself, as a teenager, millions of people were figuring out, wow, this is real, and boy, I can't wait to learn more. So not surprisingly, as the idea of extraterrestrials became more obvious and entrenched and engaged in every way possible, particularly in fiction, people are wanting to know more, including engaging ET. Now, it's also, we know from a mountain of reports, that ETs are engaging us without being asked. You don't have to send them an email. They'll show up. And so that's contact of a certain type, yes. But CE5 is pretty much Greer's term. I believe that he developed that term, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. I believe so. If he didn't, he was instrumental in spreading it or having it mature. But CE5 is when you go out specifically to try to get them to engage you, right? It's essentially like sending an email. And they are happening all over the world. And there has been something like that happening going all the way back to the 50s. But it wasn't called that. But it got more formalized in the late 1980s, 1990s, and I think Europe gets a lot of credit for that. So nothing shocking about that at all. Now, there are accounts where these efforts have proved fruitful. I personally have not. I have been involved in 2 CE5 events, somewhat formal events. Nothing happened during mine that was notable, but I know people that have had experience like that. And so the very fact that it's possible for a human to go out and try to engage this phenomenon and have it respond is extremely significant politically. It's not just, oh, that's just another thing that happens. No, the political implications of that are non-trivial, okay? That they would respond at all, that response would be benign. This is very, very important. So I know about it. But the dilemma and the dynamic tension around that is also notable. And what am I referring to? Ending the truth embargo, ending the policy of the government's refusal to acknowledge what it has known since no later than July 47, is a political process with a specific end and goal. And that is confirmation of the ET presence That confirmation is what I came to call disclosure with a capital D. The disclosure with a small d was in use well before I coined that proper noun. Certainly Greer was using it extensively, including calling his entity Disclosure Project. But the confirmation event, which I call the prize, the goal of the political movement, and every political movement has to have a prize, is disclosure with a capital D. And so the activism is about getting that event. We must have that happen. This is where it gets tricky. Because in order to get that, there is a way there. There is a path to that event. Same thing with every other major movement of the 20th century, such as the Civil Rights Movement. There was a path that many saw that would take them to the prize, which was to get the Civil Rights Act and then the concomitant Voting Rights Act, which they could have been together, but they ended up being a couple years apart. Those pieces of legislation had to be passed. And guess what? There were many aspects of the civil rights movement, many aspects of the injustice that people of color were experiencing that were not necessarily helpful to reaching that prize. In other words, it wasn't like every road would get you there, that every vehicle could travel that road. There was a set of parameters that were going to work, and you had to stick within those parameters if you wanted success. Once you got the Civil Rights Act, once you had the Voting Rights Act, then it was possible to engage a much broader range of injustices faced by people of color in this country because those laws were passed. And so the same thing applies to the disclosure movement. We must get the confirmation of that, which would be codified one way or another. All right. I'm not sure how it'll be codified. In a way, it's happening now. But ultimately, it is a proclamation, a statement by the president, who does not need congressional approval to do so, but needs the congressional support, frankly, that yes, as a national security matter, I can confirm where is non-human intelligence engaging us, and I'm sure you want to know more, and we are paying close attention. So, but that is what we must get. And the contact experience, the contact component of this phenomenon, which is extraordinarily complex and far more difficult for people to embrace in general, and definitely more difficult to embrace if you are a politician or a scientist or a journalist or a member of the military. Engaging that aspect, even now, not helpful. So what had to happen, and I've acknowledged this many times, and I'm happy to do so. It's not going to affect the outcome, but it's important to acknowledge that the experiences of millions of people, particularly those who have had non-consensual contact, meaning they didn't go out in a CE5 event and try to call in, a vehicle and maybe exchange some flash some lights and so forth. No, I'm talking about people, they want nothing of it. That had to be set aside. That experience, that aspect of this phenomenon, which is maybe the most important of all, had to be set aside as we followed the path to get that confirmation done. Right.
It seems like those stories are kind of fading a little bit. The abduction scenario of these evil aliens, if you will. Now, we've heard many different, people's opinions or reasonings behind that. Do you have an opinion on that? The evil alien abduction scenarios seem to be, people choose to call themselves contactees or experiencers and those kind of things versus there was something that came in my room and took me off, out of my bed or off planet or whatever the case is. We heard a lot about that in the early days of ufology, but that seems to be, the latter of these experiencers.
Again, the contact aspect of the ET engagement is incredibly complicated for many, many reasons. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of known accounts from people with partial memory or obtained memory through hypnotic regression, suppressed memories, partial recall, and the stories vary. Obviously, there's a spectrum of events and descriptions because it's a multifaceted thing. Then you have direct disinformation thrown into that, deliberate lies, and so forth. And so it is hardly open to scientific inquiry. And the fact that John Mack made a serious effort to try to engage it with scientific inquiry, doing work with contactees that met, to the extent possible, the kinds of requirements that scientific research expects, including publishing, I think, at least one, possibly two papers, though with great difficulty. And as early as the early 90s, he did this. Was remarkable. And I assure you, it hasn't happened since, at least not quite that way. Harvard tried to shut him down. Finally, they grudgingly let him go forward, and he continued to do the work. He wrote another book, but tragically was killed in a car incident with much more work to do. In any event, the point I'm making is that the confirmation event we must have is not going to be, my fellow Americans, I'm here today to tell you and confirm that non-human entities are coming into the bedrooms of American people without consent and taking them to someplace else and engaging them in various ways. That is not going to be, and never was going to be, the confirmation event. The confirmation event will be, there is a non-human intelligence and technology engaging us. It may involve from how and where, if the government knows and is willing to share. That's what we have to get. And so the contactees, all of them, in terms of the political process, have had to take a back seat. Have had to step aside in a way and watch this process go forward, knowing that their inclusion, their time would come once that confirmation event is done. Once disclosure has happened, capital D, then the door opens for all of their testimony, all of their experiences. And I assure you, they will be engaged. And the reason that I mention this from time to time is just to let them know we have not forgotten. I say I have not forgotten, but I have other colleagues that they're not going to forget about them. Like, okay, look, we've gotten confirmation now. Just kind of keep your ET contact to yourself. No. And so to all of them that have borne that have had to be patient for so long with so many stories to tell. Now, many of them have told their stories. There have been docs about some of these stories. There have been books about them. Right? There have been narrative films representing them, okay? And still, it did not budge the government's position one iota. Nor did it make it a breeze for people to be a contactee. Even today, there are plenty of people who, if they were to allow their coworkers at their company that, I'm a contactee, might very well suffer significant consequences, even though more and more people are coming out of that closet all the time. And so this is that dynamic tension. And I assure you that one of the reasons that the government has resisted and held on to this secret, this policy of embargo, much longer than it should have, is that those that need to know understand what they're going to have to deal with once that confirmation is out of the way. They will have to deal with many things, and there will be many hearings, but they will have to deal with the contactees. And that is going to be tough. And my answer to that is simple. If you do not want to deal with difficult things, do not run for office. Do not apply for a position with the military. Do not try to work for the DOD. Find something else to do. Because the fact that it is tough, well, all I can say to that is tough. All right? Do your job. Serve the people. Deliver the truth. And if you can't do that, get out of the way and let somebody else do it.
With the capital D, the disclosure, and the government speaking on this, do you think that this is an event where the truth will be told of exactly what's going on versus it seems like there's a response even now, what's in the news is to get ahead of the narrative, to let's control the narrative, maybe because of contactees and experiencers and enough people and the internet and TikTok and all of these things kind of going viral, and everyone has a cell phone to be able to film these experiences and sightings at mass. It seems like the government is having to respond. Is this all as planned, do you think? Just slowly so that as this capital D event comes, we kind of transition into it slowly but surely. Even now, it's not even a shock to mention, on the news saying the government officials have talked about a mothership being in our skies that is sending out little drones on the news. They're talking about this.
It's a speculation by some people, including Avi Loeb. Look, there are several things going on right now simultaneous. All I can say, well, in terms of how messy it is and how complicated it is and so forth, look, if the government had chosen to get this done back in 92, 93, 93-4, when the Clinton administration, prompted by Lawrence Rockefeller, actually started the wheels turning, it could have led somewhere. Essentially getting files released by the DOD, confronting the issue with the Department of Defense, which did get some traction with the imprimatur of President Bill Clinton and led by John Podesta, with others fully aware of it. It might have gone a lot easier for them because that was pre-Google, pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook, pre-2 billion high-quality cell phones with cameras in the hands of people, if not 3 billion. It would have been a simpler time. It would have been a lot easier, but they didn't do it. They put it off another 20 years. And in those 20 years, well, we know what's happened. Okay. And so there's two things going on. And one comes under the heading of orchestration. Enough people within our U.S. government, which includes the political class as well as the military class and the civil servant class, have come to the understanding, personally or formally, that the truth embargo has to end. And so they have to end it. But how they end it is pretty important. And so there is a definite orchestrated process to the extent that it can be orchestrated, given the complexity of the issue and the history of the issue, to end this truth embargo and bring us to the point where the president can make that announcement, the disclosure announcement, capital D. And if you follow it to the extent that you can step back from the issue, get up to a couple, 20,000 feet and look down and not get tangled up too much in the enormous amount of granular details, as well as just chaotic, almost random events that are taking place, you can, I think, see the forest for the trees. That's my job. I'm trying to describe always the forest. And the forest looks like this. The Congress and the Department of Defense and wherein the Department of Defense is basically representing the entire rest of the military intelligence complex in this case, which includes all of the military services and all of the intelligence agencies and so forth, have begun and are now 2 full years into the formal process that would allow disclosure to take place. They are doing all the right things. They are making all the right moves. They're establishing the right entities. They're passing the right laws, all of which they could have done in 1948. They could have done it in 1993. They could have done it in 1953 after the mass sightings over Washington, D.C. They chose not to. They're doing it now, but they're doing it. And if one goes to my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, or Google those 3 words, Paradigm Research Group, comes right up. Go to resources, go to Print Media Archive, and in the Print Media Archive, I have 13,000 articles that are linked there. A percentage of those links are now dead, though in many cases I do have the backup copy, which I just need time to swap out on my server, but whatever. There's 13,000 articles, but in the last 5 years, since the major event of the New York Times articles in December 16, over 5,000 articles have been published in mainstream English language press about this issue. And embedded in that 5,000 is an easily 1,500 or more articles specifically addressing this process that I'm describing, this appropriate formal process in which the Congress and the DOD and so forth are all doing, quote, the right things. It's all there. You can follow it literally unfolding, right? Including links to the legislation that's been passed in 2022, 2023 National Defense Act. When you look at it from above and you see all of that, you see exactly what I'm describing. The process leading to disclosure is well underway, and in fact, could happen this year. And I'll get to that later. All right. But the other thing you will see is that as this process unfolds, it naturally is causing great excitement, interest in society. And by that, I mean the entire population, as well as the news media, right? And even to some degree, some academics. So the academic class will hold out to the last dog dies, and they'll answer for that in history one way or another. You're just seeing all of that excitement developing within the context of mass social media. And so everybody can express an opinion, set up a website, have a Twitter account, TikTok, and Instagram, you name it. And so this issue, as it moves towards resolution, or the next phase of resolution, is spreading out globally around the world in this massive global neural network that we have created, which is changing the face of human civilization. That's happening too, right? And so for just a regular person who is trying to make sense of this, who also engages social media, they are, if they are not, unless they are superhuman, overwhelmed. The work that I'm trying to do is to try to mitigate that problem, to try to get the basic story across. I have been working for some time in Los Angeles to develop a project that could very well help to serve that need. It has been a very difficult process to get going. It has been hampered by the massive impact of the pandemic on the film industry, as well as society in general. And of course, it's also been significantly affected by that the political circumstances in America right now are off the charts of normalcy, going places that even the smartest of the smartest pundits never thought it would go. And so it's tough. It's tough. So what? If it's too tough, get out of the game, right? I'm not going to get out of the game. So what the work I'm trying to do, which is now focused in Los Angeles, but I hope to be back in DC very soon, because I need to be meeting on the Hill with some of these people as an activist, not as a journalist, as an activist consultant, not as a journalist, right? To help them maybe understand this mess that's unfolding, is about trying to mitigate the cognitive dissonance and the angst and the uncertainty and confusion that this historical process is presenting to the world. It is incredibly difficult, right? We are, at the same time, we are trying to end a 75-year truth embargo about something that hundreds of millions of people have known as true for now an increasing number of decades. We've just gone through the worst modern pandemic in history, which, if it weren't for an enormous amount of science and a huge amount of resources, could have killed hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, but nevertheless killed a lot of people and disrupted almost all of the economies of the world. We are also facing a black swan war, right? I thought maybe we had moved past this, but no. In Europe, which has had more nuclear saber rattling attached to it than any previous war, including the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Saber rattling and threats of nuclear weapons use have been endemic since the day this war began. All of this is happening at the same time, right? And so you can see why it's important that every effort to sort of make sense of this takes place, which is one of the reasons why I have really involved myself deeply in an upcoming conference called the Contact in the Desert. Contact in the Desert, which began in Joshua Tree, a desert resort west of where it is now in Indian Wells, and I attended the first couple and was utterly astounded at what happened. Not because the facilities were high-end resort, they were not. Older buildings and spread out amongst cactus, though it had an historical connection to the distant past. That Integratron, the famous Integratron, was not far away, nor is the giant rock far away. But the temperatures reached 110 to 12 degrees. And I'm walking around Joshua Tree, going from one event to another or going to my presentation in 112 degree heat. Never experienced it in my life. And the place was packed with a couple of thousand people. And I'm thinking, these couple of thousand people came to the desert to listen to us talk about this issue in 112 degree heat when some of the buildings' air conditioners were not working properly. And it was like testimony to the fact that at a appropriate level, this issue is incredibly important to human beings right now. And so that was the early days. Eventually, though, it transitioned from Joshua Tree to Indian Wells Renaissance Resort, which is a top-of-the-line resort and became, I believe, the premier conference in the United States, with as many as 4,000 people attending. And it's not cheap.
When is that coming up?
Once again, this year we're going to have that event with 60 speakers. I'm pleased to be one of them. Many new ones. So we're getting a lot of new, fresh information from people that have brought their experience and work to the forefront. June 2 to 4, Indian Wells Renaissance. I'm hoping people will, if they can possibly attend. If they want to volunteer, I think there's still a chance, but they're almost ready to close out that. But there will be a lot that's going to happen at that conference from a lot of people that will help to clarify this massively complex thing that's going on. All right. And then I'll leave you with this. Based upon what is happening in Washington right now, there is a very distinct possibility that hearings with military witnesses will have already taken place in front of congressional committees, major congressional committees, before that first speaker takes the stage in Indian Wells on June the 2nd.
That's going to be a good one. They have an amazing lineup. A lot of people who are vetted in this community, who are proven stand the test of time, if you will, and who have taken it to the next level and have been there since day one. George Norrie, so many names to even begin to go down, start naming. Is Graham Hancock going to be there? I believe I saw his name.
Graham Hancock will be there.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing. His work is blowing up right now. Somebody who's been in it and had his work under the radar of scrutiny and all of that stuff, and still kicking, still being protested, with his stuff on Netflix. A lot of these people, change is something that, never comes easily. And so even with disclosure, it's one of those things when we look at the civil rights movement, all of these movements where there was a massive shift, a massive change. It wasn't something that was just like, just with ease and grace, everyone just stepped into. And I really do think it's about controlling the narrative. To get ahead of the spin. And so we're having to get it from the news. Like they have to respond. Once something becomes so big, they have to respond to it, for whether it's to get clicks or to stay on top of the narrative. It just seems like the response is going to be that they're an alien threat is the key word, right? Not an alien, civilization that's going to unite everyone, but it's something that's going to attack or be a threat to whether it's the people or the powers that be. What are your thoughts on
that? Let me be clear. A couple of points. One, there is no way that the disclosure event was going to happen without a controlled narrative. They're going to try to conduct this in a way that gets the job done. And that means congressional hearings are going to be held. That means witnesses need to be previewed. That's happening already. The Pentagon needs to set up certain structures, which it is doing, and so forth. All of this is controlled. This is not a random process. So the idea of controlled narrative, that's not offensive to me. Manipulated narrative in which the government or any other entity tries to take advantage of these events and create a false narrative, sure. But a orderly, appropriate process is exactly what we should have. That's point number one. Point number two, and I can't reiterate this enough. Remember what I said earlier. There is a pathway to getting this done. And part of that path that makes it possible to get this done, which must happen, is that it has to be in a context that is politically viable and comfortable for the key parties. And the key parties are essentially the Department of Defense and all of the agencies and services that it fronts, and the entire political class, primarily fronted by the Congress. And what is the context? National security, right? National security is the context this thing has to be delivered in. It can't be delivered, right, in the context of a new age movement with people dancing and, cymbals clapping and singing and whatever, and, in the halls of Congress. No. Now, the truth is that the presence of non-human technology has and is and likely will be for some time to come a potential threat. There is no question about that. Every asteroid in the asteroid belt is a potential threat. The sun is a potential threat. At any time, it could do a CME that could reduce our civilization to the Stone Age. Every nuclear weapon that we now possess, and it's about 20,000, is a potential threat. Every nuclear country is a potential threat. We are surrounded with potential threats. There are animals all over this planet carrying various viruses that could jump to a human tomorrow. They are potential threats. So let's get that out of the way. It has always been a potential threat, and it's fully appropriate to present it as such, as one of the reasons why it absolutely should get the attention of Congress, the Department of Defense, President, and the American people. Now, on occasion, certain individuals within this process get a little hyperventilated and they go a little too much toward a threat. Meaning, oh, it's definitely a threat. And they may go further than that. It can't be, that cannot be avoided. But if, again, you go to 30,000 feet and you look down at the coverage and the statements that are being made, it is very clear from that altitude that what is happening is the national security aspect of this real phenomena is carrying forward, is the medium by which this thing is carrying forward and getting the attention it deserves. But if you read every single word in the two major legislations, the NDAA Acts of 2002 and 2003, the idea of a real, actual threat, it's not there. There are appropriate references. It is an aspect, but they are not pushing oh my God, we've got to pass this legislation in order to save ourselves from the evil ETs. Evil ET is the manifestation of Hollywood's fictional money-making agenda, which is fine. I was in the business of making money. The film industry makes money. And there is no genre in all of film history that has made more money than movies about extraterrestrials, which tells us a lot, by the way, and has significant political implications. And so evil aliens have dominated. In spite of that, in spite of all of the evil aliens that we have been seeing since we were kids, overall, the idea of evil aliens in terms of the disclosure process underway is minimal. All right, that is very important. And so again, but until we finally get the confirmation of the ET presence, until the hearings then expand into a broad spectrum of testimony about all aspects of this, and more documents come out, and research is unveiled, and certain USAPs are opened up, and of course, until the contactees can sit down and give us in granular detail exactly what they've experienced and been told and learned, it is still wide open in the age of social media and umpteen billion cell phones and umpteen billion accounts in social media. We are wide open for speculation and fun, gags and pranks, nonsense, conjecture, manipulation. And that's just the way it is. And that's one of the reasons why governments need to do what they do. Okay? By not disclosing the ET presence, it helps to guarantee all of this mishigas will take place, wasting our time, wasting our lives, right? Causing harm and damage. Every contactee that ever lost a job or a spouse because they came forward and had to finally say and could no longer contain what has happened to them since they were a child, that is owed to the government's truth embargo. Every one of those instances directly goes back to the government's embargo, meaning we had this as a national security policy. We're sorry you had to pay a personal price. Well, guess what? Every person that's ever died in battle, serving their country in war to protect the freedoms and what have you, have paid a price. Obviously, the people I'm referring to haven't paid quite that level of a price, but nevertheless, there's always a price when government takes actions which are not in the best interest of the country or goes too far. The initial decision to embargo the ET reality was a national security decision pretty well justified by the times. And that remained the case going forward for certainly some decades. The problem is that policy has continued too long. It should have been ended decades ago. So it's not a mistake in kind, it's a mistake in time, right? At some point, you need to stop. There needs to be an end to things. Things just can't go on forever. You have to be able to sunset things. This was never sunsetted. and the government ultimately realized that until the people really push back, they could probably continue indefinitely. Well, that's over. We're pushing back in ways they couldn't even have dreamed of in 1960, 1970. And so, yeah, the policy is going to be sunsetted. We're going to get disclosure. Hopefully we'll have hearings within the next 60 days. And if that happens, the Contact in the Desert is going to be one super high energy, exciting conference, and I just can't wait to do it.
Yes. Going to be awesome. All-star lineup. You're going to be there. It's going to be amazing. Let people know where they can go to check out Contact in the Desert, and also check out the work that you're doing. You have documentaries and films and things you've been a part of and worked on. So much resources on your website. Let people know where they can check out your work. If it's even many people their first time hearing about you today.
Well, contactinthedesert.com. That's, or just the words, just Google the words Contact in the Desert. It's all right there. Also, I've got links on my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, as well as I also have a YouTube channel, Paradigm Research Group YouTube channel, where I've got a lot of, I need to update it, but there's hundreds of videos there regarding my work. And I certainly invite people to follow me on Twitter. You can't have too many Twitter followers. I know Twitter is going through some ups and downs and it's getting controversial, but it still has, I think, 500 million followers or accounts. Pretty important. So yeah, follow at Steve Bassett or Paradigm Research Group on Twitter if you can. I have some Facebook space, so one can also hook up there. And check out the Contact in the Desert website. If you can be there, be there. If you can volunteer, volunteer. Though I do believe they will be making available these, oh Lord, how many lectures afterwards to the public on their website. So the message that they're going to get conveyed in Indian Wells is going to spread from there. This is the major conference this year. I am going to be speaking at another major conference in December called the World Ufology Conference, and that's going to be in Mexico City. It is part of a group that started in Spain, I believe, Barcelona. They're holding another World Ufology Congress in Barcelona this year. But the big one is coming up in Mexico City. This could be a massive event because a lot is going to happen between now and December of this year. I'm excited about that, and I certainly invite people to check out that conference. I don't think the details have been posted yet, but you can check out the Barcelona event coming up, World Ufology Congress. It's just one of many things that are happening around the world. The entire world, in spite of all of the awful politics going on, in spite of all of the territorial threats that are still going on, in spite of the usual array of awful human behavior, the entire world is waking up to the fact that not only are we not alone, we are certainly going to have it confirmed to us that we are not alone. And I'm just glad to be alive when this happens, and I hope everyone else feels the same. What an extraordinary time with so much promise and yet so much risk. Keep a positive attitude, pay close attention, and perhaps I'll see you in Indian Wells.
There you go. Stephen Bassett, thanks for coming on, man. Great to talk to you, and we'll have to do it again sometime. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, brother. Wow, that was a great episode. Stephen Bassett is one of the giants, man. One of the big name giants. He's one of the big name people. He's been doing this for a long time. And when you hear the term that something is built upon the backs of giants, he's one of the ones, man. He's one of the ones that day one has been putting in a lot of work, clearing ground so that people like myself and many others can talk about this stuff openly and be able to make ufology what it is today. Everything that Ancient Aliens has done, Stephen Greer, James Gilliland, Project Camelot, Jordan Maxwell, David Wilcock, George Norrie, Art Bell, so many people, and his name deserves to be in there with him. He's been doing this for a long time, and lobbying and doing things, going places that other people can't go. Let's say that. So, man, hats off to Stephen Bassett. Great episode. When it comes to controlling the narrative or talking about these threats and things. Man, it's something that's very interesting to think about, because it seems like something is always brought up within ufology. And it seems that it's not just ufology. It's also within spirituality, is that the higher powers that be, that are at 30,000 feet and well beyond, looking down, what do they see? And what are they trying to communicate? One of the things that keeps coming up over and over again in research and in experience for me, as well as many others, is this idea of free energy. And when you talk about a threat to the way of living or a threat to our governments, the governments of the earth, what more could be a threat for these ideas of alien technology and aliens, ascended beings, whatever names you want to give them, ETs, extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, even if that's your term, are showing free energy to use the sun's energy, solar energy, wind energy, water, fire, earth, the positive and negatively charged ions in the atmosphere that can be combined. And man, there's so much research going on into this, and so many people who are forerunners in this movement who have talked to whistleblowers and have had experiences about levitating objects that the ancients once had, that someone took and hid from the populace, where you could generate your own energy, use the energy of the sun to power your house, to clean your water, to filter your water, all of these things. And so oil, gas, fossil fuels, all of these things, it's a threat to that industry. And it seems like for such a time as this, with people who can just push a button and turn all of that off for all of us, well, we go back to the way our ancestors lived, or we don't have the money to afford water. Where do you get it? Do you know how to capture rainwater? Do you know how to cleanse the rainwater? Can you use crystals and sacred geometry to capture or generate energy? And many of these UFOs and UAPs are moving in patterns that resemble sacred geometry. The whole crop circle phenomena, when they come down and leave sacred geometric patterns. This is a spiritual talk as well as a UFO talk, because I don't think it is just nuts and bolts. That would be the easy answer. And they probably could have been given us some type of disclosure, if you will. Because if it's nuts and bolts and it can only do certain things, but when it's a spiritual thing, when it's a plasma thing, when it's many different types of ships or vehicles or entities, I believe that many of the things that I'm seeing and have encountered weren't ships at all, but were living creatures. And it is said that the cherubim or even the seraphim were living vehicles. They were entities that could carry other entities within it. But when they come together, they formed something else. A flying serpent, the seraphim, the fiery ones, these different combinations of beings that come together and form something. In the last episode, we talked about the spheres that people are seeing and encountering. People are experiencing these in their backyard. But many of these are being caught on film and zooming in, and it seems like this sphere, but it's also changing shape. It's like moving, and at will it can change. But zooming in on some of these pictures, they're claiming to see occupants in the middle of these spheres. If you have not listened to that episode, go back and check it out. It was the last one we did on UFOs. And it's not so easy. I come from a background of religion or just life in general, we like to put things in filing cabinets and we give it a name and it becomes that, and now we can tuck it away. Nothing, not just ufology, not just UFOs. Nothing is that simple. Everything is multi-dimensional. It coexists on many levels, seen and unseen, including the aerial phenomena that many people are experiencing, catching on camera, and are given information. Downloads and epiphanies and inspiration come with such sightings. Many different moving parts. So not just one thing of controlling the narrative or potential threats. Yeah, potential threats for certain, but potential threats to whom? That's the bigger question. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like more information about my work, my research, my group, check out my Patreon. We meet twice weekly on Discord and on Zoom for discussion, prayer, meditation, and just doing this doggone thing together. If you're looking for community, we're looking for you, man. Check us out. The links are below. You get access to so much. My music, documentaries, webinars, so much extra content that I'm bringing to the table. Make sure you check it out. Patreon.com/truthseeker. And we will do it again. Be blessed, guys. Thanks.
Your way so much higher than mine, so much higher than mine, so much deeper than mine, so much deeper than mine.
Well, that does it for this episode, folks. To hear more episodes of the Truth Seeker podcast, head over to truthseeker.com. And if you're wanting to support the show and get rewards, go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/truthseeker.